Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Professor Dake. It is indeed a great honor and pleasure for me to be invited here for the first colloquium of the Research Center for World Buddhist Cultures. I would like to express my deepest gratitude to President Takashi Irisawa of Ryukoku University for inviting me to give this talk. My warmest thanks also go to Professors Mitsuya Dake, Kosuke Shimizu, and all the other staff members of the Research Center for World Buddhist Cultures, which is one of the leading centers for Buddhist studies in Japan today, for organizing this colloquium despite the COVID-19 epidemic. Today, I will talk about how a poetry consisting of some 200 verses came to be identified as presumably left by the Buddha, and what the Buddha said in it. My presentation differs substantially from the current theory in some new interpretations, possibly supported by new findings. Let me discuss the main points in the hope that our understanding of the Buddha's philosophy may progress, and that the message of the Buddha to us contemporary beings may become clearer. My talk today is entitled Cultivating Tenderness and Insight through Introspection. I presume that this is, in fact, the essence of the teachings preached by the Buddha, and I hope you will see this in my talk. Before I begin the main topic, let me say a few words about the academic contribution of Nishihonganji Temple and Ryukoku University. The Nishihonganji Temple established the Gakuryo, a Buddhist seminary academy, in 1639, which later developed into Ryukoku University. As early as 1882, Nishihonganji Temple sent 2 academic monks to France. This is Le Bouddhisme Japonais, published at Paris by one of them, Ryo-on Fujishima. It presented the essential points of the doctrines and the history of 12 Buddhist sects in Japan. This is the ending sentence of its introduction by Fujishima. Even with the help of Sylvain Levy, young lecturer at the Sorbonne at the time, his French is still remarkable. Ryukoku University is one of the few universities that laid the foundations of modern Buddhist studies in Japan. This publication by Fujishima marks the starting point of Ryukoku University's academic contribution to the modern Buddhist studies. Ozui Otani, the 22nd head priest of Honganji Temple, dedicated his life to the reconstitution of Buddhism, undertaking various projects, including 3 expeditions to Central Asia and India. On his life, please refer to the newly published book, Otani Causes Ideas and Concept of Residential Space, edited by Mazumi Mitani. The expedition discovered one of the oldest paper manuscripts of Chinese characters written around 328 in the Tarim Basin. It is an important source in the history of Chinese politics, as well as of Chinese calligraphy. In the region of Kuchar, the largest oasis in East Turkestan, Buddhists began erecting temples from the 3rd century onwards. The Otani expedition found there a beautiful reliquary. This is a painting in a cave temple in Mezeklik. The Turfan region, together with Kuchar, was a Tokharian country, but from the 9th century onwards, it was ruled by the Uyghur, who also believed in Buddhism. Now we come back to our main issue. Today, I will first talk about how we can identify the earliest text presumed to have been left by the Buddha himself. It is the section of Octad, the Atthakavagga. Then, By reading the text, I will try to understand what the Buddha wanted to communicate to us. I would like to show you as much material as possible here, so please forgive me if I do not take enough time for you to read it on the spot. The video will be available on the university's website, and I hope you can watch it later. This map shows how Buddhism spread. I have added a bold green arrow to the left of the original map in order not to forget the possibility that the Buddhism came to Sri Lanka from the region along the Narmada River in western India. This is suggested from the fact that the Pali language is akin to the language of the King Ashoka's inscriptions in that region. Since King Ashoka's conversion to Buddhism, Buddhism spread throughout India and later to the other parts of Asia, where the Tripitaka was transmitted in various Buddhist schools. Since the verses of the Dhammapada are quoted in the greatest number and variety of scriptures, comparisons of these verses allow us to tell that the Pali scriptures conserve the earliest form in most cases. I made this comparison by studying the Subashim Manuscript, the earliest Sanskrit manuscript of the Sarvastivadin version of the Dhammapada, dating from about 300 CE, discovered at Subashi. In 1988, I have published these studies on the Subashim Manuscript. In 1995, I created the first database in Japan of Pali scriptures with 43 researchers from APTI, the Association for Pali Text Inputting, and have since continued my research into the earliest Buddhist text. In 2003, I presented the estimate that the Atthakabanga is the oldest Buddhist scripture in the article Formation of the Mind According to the Buddha. In 2011, I edited a volume of Social Science Information, a journal of the Maison des Sciences de Rome, Paris. In it, I contributed 2 articles which reveal that the Buddha's intention was to train a small number of noble-minded generalist practitioners who would gain insight into all areas of the world to contribute to the well-being of others. In 2014, I published a detailed analysis, The Epistemology of the Buddha, or the Possibilities of the Mind. My main papers and books concerning the Atthakabanga are listed here. Most of the papers can be downloaded from my website, classics.jp/hn, and I hope you find them useful. The Atthakabanga, the 4th chapter of the Sutta Nipata, is a single poetry consisting of just over 200 verses. I estimate that the text was probably produced by the Buddha himself or under his supervision. Attaka means octad or group of 8. Atthakabanga means chapter of octad. From the end of 19th century, interest in the earliest Buddhist scriptures increased in Europe. Fosbel noted in 1881 that chapter 3 and 4 of the Sutta Nipata are very old in language and contents. Rhys Davies formulated a hypothesis in 1902 that chapter 4 and 5 of the Sutta Nipata are among the earliest Buddhist texts, because the commentary on these 2 chapters, called Niddesa, is treated as canon, and no other Pali scripture has such a commentary as canon. In 1916, Wilhelm Geiger argued that 2 stages of linguistic development are desirable in the Pali canon, namely, first, the language of Gathas, and second, the language of canonical prose. I myself have proposed since 2003 to divide the Pali Canon into 3 layers. My first and second layers roughly correspond to Geiger's text of Language of Gathas, and my third layer corresponds to his text of canonical prose. I think of the 3 layers of the Pali Canon in this way. The earliest layer, layer 1, consists of the Attaka Vagga and Parayana Vagga, the chapter 4 and 5 of the Sutta Nipata, and the Kagabhishana Sutta, a small sutta in chapter 1, the Uraga Vagga. All these texts are annotated by the Nibbesa. The second layer includes the first, second, and third chapters of the Sutta Nipata, except for the introductory verses and the prose portion. Among the Pali Canon other than the Sutta Nipata, the earlier verses such as Dhammapada, Tera Terigata, etc. are also included in this second layer. The third layer of the Sutta Nipata includes the Bhattagata and the prose portion in the Sutta Nipata. Most of the Pali canonical prose texts are included in this layer. The word Attaka, octad, attests the antiquity of the Attaka Vagga. Historically, Attaka has been interpreted in 2 ways. The first interpretation considers that Attaka comes from Sanskrit Ashtaka, meaning octad, while the second, from Artaka, meaning worthful. From philological point of view, the second interpretation is untenable. 2 interpretations of the word Attaka are found in Northern Buddhist texts. In a fragment discovered in Central Asia by Herle, we find Artakavargiyam Sutram. In Divyavadana, Abhidharma Koshavasha, etc., we read Artavargiya without the affix ka of Artaka. In addition, we find the translation of the word Arta or Artaka in the Chinese translation of the Attaka Vagga and in the Chinese Sanyukta Agama and Mahisha Sakavinaya. On the other hand, in the Chinese translation of Mahasangika Vinaya, the title Attaka Vagga is translated by 8 Varga Sutra or 8 Group Sutra, suggesting the original Ashtaka. In Pali, Sanskrit Arta normally becomes Atta with dental T. The notation Atta with retroflex T is almost confined to the compound, as Critical Pali Dictionary points out. In Sanskrit, there is no attestation of the word Artaka unless it is prefixed like Nilartaka or Anartaka. Divyavadana and Abhidharma Koshavasha seem to have changed Artaka into Arta in order to avoid unusual Artaka. The possibility of the original Arta Varga is doubtful, given that manuscript Herle has Artaka. Semantically, the word Arta is not appropriate for the title of the Attaka Vagga, because in the 5 uses in the Attaka Vagga, Arta is not used to denote something to be admired or aimed at, but rather futile, as shown in the verse 829. It is only from the layer 2 onwards that Arta is used with an affirmative connotation, as in the Dhammapada 100. If Attaka Vagga is to be understood as chapter octad, then what does octad Ashtaka mean? 2 methods of division of the Rig Veda are known, called the Mandala method and the Ashtaka method. In both methods, the key number is 8, Ashta. First, the Mandala method, historical one. The Rig Veda is divided into 10 mandalas. The earlier core part mandalas 2 to 7 is often referred to as the family books. The other 4 mandalas are either of hymns extracted from the family books or later additions. The family books, mandala 2 to 7, are arranged according to the 2 principles. 1. The number of anuvakas per mandala increases. 2. The subtotal numbers of anuvakas, suktas, and mantras are all divisible by 8. Second, the Ashtaka method. This is later and more mechanical method. The following 2 principles can be discernible. 1. The number of adhyayas per Ashtaka is 8. 2. The total number of Ashtakas, adhyayas, vargas, and mantras are all divisible by 8. The arrangement of the Attaka Magga with the following 2 principles approximate the mandala method of the family books. 1. The number of verses per sutta increases. 2. The total number of suttas, 16, is divisible by 8. At the same time, the fact that the numbers of verses in the 2nd to 5th sutta are all 8, and that the Magga is named Attaka, would indicate also its possible proximity to the Ashtaka method. A detailed account of the method of arranging the Vedic canon is given in a paper by Michael Witzel, Harvard University. The use of Ashtaka octad as a chapter title dates back at least to the Brahmana period, as discussed by Jan Honda. The Pali texts arranged according to this Vedic method are found nowhere else but in the Attaka Magga. This uniqueness would indicate its special antiquity. This arrangement method should be taken into account in reading the Attaka Magga because 1. The sequence of verses can be unintentional, with identical topics dispersed here and there. 2. The principle of increasing number of verses will help to determine the possible later addition of verses. The second characteristic indicating the antiquity of the Attaka Magga compared to the other Pali text is its prosody. In India, where there is a large number of undated texts, prosody statistic is one of the few reliable means of determining the relative chronology of literatures. This is because prosody statistics processes a large number of verses and places the result in the long historical development of prosody over thousands of years. The hymns of the Rig Veda are all syllabic meters, versified according to the combination of a number of short and long syllables. Quantity-based meters, Matra Vritta, and syllable-quantitative meters, Varna Vritta, have not yet appeared. Rigvedic prosody is divided into 2 main groups, the Trimeter and the Demeter. The Trimeter, consisting of 3 feet, opening break cadence, has 11 or 12 syllables in a line. The Demeter, consisting of 2 feet, opening and cadence, has 8 syllables in a line. Trimetric lines account for 59% and dimetric lines for 36%, and together they account for 95% of Rigvedic hymns. Details of the statistics of the meters of the 4 Rigveda are given here. The 4 main meters, Tristubh, Jagati, Gayatri, and Anushtubh, account for 82%. There are meters such as Ushni, Brihati, etc., which consist of a mixture of trimeter and demeter lines and account for 13%. The major trimeter are 11-syllable Trishtavu and 12-syllable Jagati. The Jagati was formed by adding an extra short syllable at the pinnacle of the Trishtavu. In general, the two syllables, initial and final of a line, are of optional length and marked here with an X. Since the optionality of the initial and final syllables of a line is allowed and the cadence rhythm of the trimeter line is substantially fixed, it is the rhythm of the three consecutive syllable unit that plays a decisive role. This is why Pingala begins his Chanda Sutra, the earliest known treatise on prosody, by naming 8 different three-syllable units as Mayarasa Tajabana. Our prosodic analysis in syllabic meters should focus on tracing the behavior of these three-syllable units. In the D meter, the 4-line Anushtup was formed by adding an extra line to the 3-line Gayatri. This formation occurred in the process of compiling Rigvedic hymns over several generations of poets. In the course of time, the Anushtup was divided into 2 parts, each with 2 lines. As a result, the cadential rhythm Ja, short, long, short, of the odd lines was transformed into other rhythms so that it would not be confused with the cadential rhythm of the end of even lines. This change of cadential rhythm in the odd lines further differentiated Anushtup from Gayatri. This table shows the decline of the proportion of cadential rhythm Ja in the odd lines of the Anushtup over time. This movement, already prominent in Mandala 10, the latest part of the Rig Veda, continued in the Atharva Veda and the Atthakavagga, almost completed in layer 2 and finished in layer 3. Thus, Anushtup independence from Gayatri took more than 1,000 years to achieve. The prosodic statistics place the Atthakavagga between the Vedic canon and the layer 2 of the Pali canon, but much closer to the Vedic canon. An arbitrary manipulation to forge poems with prosody of ancient taste would be possible for a small number of poems, but impossible for a large number of poems of great distance in time and space. The fact that the movement has continued in a fixed direction for over 1,000 years testified to the authenticity of the data, as well as the strong and relative power of the prosodic tradition in India. Today, with the development of databases of major Indian classics, prosodic analysis can play a decisive role in the relative dating of classics. We very much hope that new studies using prosodic history analysis will increase in the near future. Here, we will summarize the internal and external indicators that suggest a discrepancy between layer 1 and layer 2 onwards. So far, we have examined facts which suggest the particular antiquity of the Atthakavagga, such as the annotation by Nidesa, the legacy of Vedic arrangement method, the earlier prosody close to late Vedic text. Linguistic features also testify to the antiquity of the Atthakavagga. For example, the scansion of the interjection charahi, the old nominal stem in as of jaras, or the nominative plural ending in so, etc. We call these facts external indicators. Internal indicators include the ways of life practiced by monks. Whereas in layer 1, the monks lead a life of solitary ascetics, From layer 2 onwards, they lead the monastic life. The evaluations marked here with a plus or minus sign indicate whether the verse in question considers the situation denoted by the word desirable or to be avoided, respectively. Some differences are due to the change in the meaning of a word over time, as in the case of the words in item 2. But more important differences are due to the difference in philosophical positions, as for the words in item 3. As an example of change of meaning, take the case of viraga. Viraga refers to such a negative emotion as aversion in all 4 occurrences in layer 1. The similar meaning, irritation, is attested by Panini, va citta virage. But in layer 2, viraga refers to the recommendable state of mind of indifference to worldly objects in all 4 occurrences. Most important discrepancy is due to their philosophical positions. For instance, in the Atthakavagga, truth and purity are denied not only their authority, but even their existence. However, as seen in the Four Noble Truths, Chattari Arya Satchani, they regain authority from the second layer. 886. There are no different multiple truths that are perpetual in the world. If there are, it is a cognition. Fabricating a speculation based on their own experiences, they proclaim a dualism of truth and falsehood. Truth cannot be recognized by our cognition, which is unceasingly undermined by selfishness. 824. Only in this, they claim, does purity lie. They insist that there is no purity in other ways of life. Nevertheless, declaring that where they stand there is righteousness, they are espousing their respective truth. The truth they proclaim is only their individual and occasional beliefs, not the soul and universal truth. Satya, truth, and Suddhi, purity related to eternal existence or immortality, had been highly valued since the Rig Veda. The Atthakavagga denied their values, but layer 2 fully revived both values, as you see in this table. The notion of Nibbana, a process of incessant extinction of selfishness, forms the philosophical basis of the Atthakavagga. It is this Nibbana that makes up the discrepancies between the 2 layers observed through various indicators we have seen so far. Panini accounts for Nirvana, the past passive participle of Nirva, Nirvano abate. One commentary notes, in case of wind, cease to blow, Nirvata. But for ascetics, extinguished desire, Nirvanam Muninam. Panini would have had this meaning in mind. Panini's grammar, together with the Atthakavagga, will be among the first attestations of the word Nirvana, with the meaning extinction of desire. I would add that prosodically, the Mahabharata, with numerous occurrences of Nirvana, is dated to the period contemporary with layer 2 or later. There are 2 points worth noting about the descriptions of Nirvana. The first point is that in all the 4 uses of the word Nibbana by the Buddha, that is to say, not by the disciple, the sentences describing Nibbana are followed by the warning, do not think that you have reached the final goal, total extinction. For instance, 822 reads as follows. One should practice emancipation. It is the supreme of noble acts. But one should not, by virtue of this, think oneself the best. By doing so, one is indeed close to Nibbana. The second noteworthy point is that the verb seek is used in 4 passages in which Nibbana is mentioned, e.g., 940. Do not seek after those things in the world which are binding on you. Renounce object of desire entirely and practice extinction of selfishness. The Pali Sikh corresponds to the Sanskrit shiksha, a desiderative of the root shak, to be able to, and denote to wish to be able to learn or practice. In the grip of the ever-regenerating selfishness, we can only keep on hoping and striving for the total dispelling of selfishness, though knowing that we will never achieve it. Expressing this never-ending wish and effort, the verb seek was a favorite in the Atthakavagga. Considering these 2 points, the ever-attached admonishment and use of the verb seek, Nibbana in the Atthakavagga is a process of perpetually trying to extinguish selfishness through introspection. From layer 2 onwards, however, Nibbana will become more a fixed state of mind that should be attained as a goal at the end of ascetic practices. So, how can we put Nibbana into practice? The answer is to devote oneself to introspection in the life of an ascetic without possessions. For the sake of introspection, the Buddha gives an analytical account of cognition in a series of verses which we will read here. The series begins with a question posed to the Buddha. From what originate fights and quarrels, lamentations and anguish accompanied by malice, and presumption and arrogance accompanied by slander? Please tell me what these originate from. Here and after, the conscious consciousnesses are written in red, and the subconsciousnesses or unaware motives that affect the consciousnesses in blue. This verse enumerated 2 types of conflicts, physical fight and verbal quarrel. The emotions that arise in the 2 conflicts are lamentation and anguish on the one hand, and presumption and arrogance on the other. The former has as its unaware motive malice, which seeks to cause the other to suffer, and the latter, slander, which seeks to entrap the other. This diagram depicts what the verse 862 states. The verse asks, what gives rise to the physical and verbal conflicts, and to the 2 types of emotions that accompany them? As a hidden motive, the lamentation and anguish have malice, and the presumption and arrogance have slander. This is the answer. From arbitrariness, fear, originate physical and verbal conflicts and 4 emotions. Pali fear corresponds etymologically to the English free, meaning here arbitrary idea or planning. As an unaware motive, malice is present in both conflicts, while slander is present only in a quarrel. The description of 863 is summarized in this diagram. 2 conflicts and the conscious and subconscious consciousnesses originate from arbitrariness. The relationship between the 2 conflicts and the 2 subconsciousnesses, malice and slander, is described in more detail than in the previous verse. This diagram illustrates the full contents of the verses from 862 to 874. The numbers on the far right are the verse numbers describing the items in the center. The descriptions of the two kinds of conflicts in 862 and 863 are grouped here under the term actions. In the diagram, two flows, conscious and subconscious, are depicted. The process is shown retrospectively in time. Actual action proceeds from the bottom to the top. Let me clarify, first of all, the relationship between the cognition, sanya, and the 10 elements, conscious and subconscious, in the two flows. The keyword is nidana, connection, which represent the mutual relationship between the 5 elements in each of the two flows. Nidana also represent the relationship between sanya, cognition, on the one hand, and the first elements in conscious and subconscious flows, rupa, sensation, and papancha, bubbling, on the other. According to Louis Renou, dans le Shatapatha Brahmana, Nidana désigne une connexion à base d'identité entre deux choses situées sur des plans différents. If the relationship represented by Nidana is an identity-based connection, as Renou pointed out, then these 10 elements are best understood as the 5 phases with the two modes, conscious and subconscious, of the single cognition, sanya, rather than as separate entities from the cognition. These 5 phases thus represent the cognitive process of the mind from the beginning of cognition to action. At the same time, they correspond to the mental development process by which a naive newborn becomes self-conscious, knows gain and loss, makes a judgment based on the experiences of gain and loss, and finally has long-term objectives. In verse 864, the question arises as to what arbitrary ideas relate to, and what aspiration and aim relate to. The relationship between the conscious, here arbitrariness, and the subconscious, here aspiration and aim, is not explained here, but will be explained in 869, which state that the subconscious motivate the conscious. In all the 5 phases, the subconscious is considered as giving motive or criterion to the conscious. 865. The arbitrary ideas in the world, which are the greedy thoughts that prevail in the world, relate to emotion. People's aspiration and aim for the future relate to what will be mentioned below, i.e. judgment. The Attakabanga commentaries, Nidesa and Paramattajotika, both incorrectly note here that the demonstrative itas refers to the preceding chanda, emotion. Since then, this interpretation has been followed even by modern scholars. However, the demonstrative itas normally refers to what follows, opposed to amutra or amutas, which refers to what precedes. Thus, itas refers to vinichaya, judgment of the following verse. This new interpretation can complete the scheme of the 5 phases of the cognition as we saw earlier. 866. To what does the emotion relate in the world, and from what do the judgments originate? From what do those emotions as anger, deceit, and suspicion, these consciousnesses, Dhamma, which are expounded by the aesthetic, i.e. the Buddha, originate? Anger, deceit, and suspicion are examples of the emotion. The verse asks to what relate the emotion and from what the subconscious judgments originate. Note that Dhamma here substitutes such emotions as anger, deceit, and suspicion. These kinds of substitutions by the word Dhamma are occasionally found in the Atthakavagga. 867. Emotion arises according to what is commonly referred to in the world as like and dislike. People form a judgment in the world through experiencing gain and loss in their sensory experiences. In the conscious phase, our likes and dislikes in occasional experiences accumulate to form a single emotion towards a person or a situation. In the subconscious phase, the sense of gain and loss for oneself affects the like and dislike and accumulate to form the judgment which affect the emotion. 868. Anger, deceit, and suspicion. These consciousnesses too exist when two consciousnesses, i.e. like and dislike, are present. He who has suspicion should practice the path of knowledge. The ascetic Buddha understood and expounded these consciousnesses. In 869, the subconsciousness gain and loss is made explicit as the motive for the consciousnesses like and dislike. This verse and the next suggest that each consciousness takes as its motive or is affected by the corresponding subconsciousness. 870. Like and dislike relate to perception. When there is no perception, these two do not exist. I will explain to you that the gain and loss, which is motive for like and dislike, relate to what will be mentioned later, possession. The demonstrative itas refers to the elements to be mentioned in the next verse, possession, paringaha. Again, both commentaries misinterpret itas as referring to the preceding perception, passa. 871. To what does perception relate in the world? Or what do the possessions originate from? When what is absent, does possessiveness not exist? When what has disappeared, do perceptions not make perception? Paringaha, possessions, are paraphrased as mamatta, possessiveness. It is a poetry technique regularly used in the Atthakavagga to depict one object with multiple modifiers. 872. Perceptions exist dependent on name and sensation. Possessions relate to longing. When longing is absent, possessiveness does not exist. When sensation has disappeared, perceptions do not make perception. In the table below, the notions substituted by the word Dhamma, in the same way as we saw in 866, are categorized in the left-hand column. Numbers are the verse numbers of the Sutta Nipata. If we compare them with the elements in the 5 phases of cognition, we find that the elements Rupa and Nama correspond to the 5 senses. This helps us to confirm the meaning of Rupa and Nama in the Atthakavagga as sensation. Nama and Rupa, literally name and appearance, form a pair of concepts since the Rig Veda. The compound Nama Rupa is attested since the Atharva Veda. The myth about the creation of the universe by the creator Prajapati or Brahman, found in the Shatapatha and Taittiriya Brahmana, state that the superiority of Rupa over Nama was recognized by the creator because the extension of Rupa is greater than that of Nama and includes it completely. This would be the reason why Rupa alone represents both Rupa and Nama in the last line of 872. For one attained to fat state, does sensation disappear? How does pleasure displeasure also disappear? Explain me how it disappears. My wish is that we know this. The longing, icha, in the previous verse is paraphrased here as pleasure displeasure, sukha dukkha. Note that two questions are asked here, questions about how sensation and pleasure displeasure disappear respectively. The answers to them should be found in the following verse. 874. It has neither the cognition of common cognition, nor that of deranged cognition. It is neither without cognition, nor with the cognition of his having extinguished longing. For one who has attained such a state, the sensation disappears. This is because, since what is called bubbling relates to cognition, longing disappears. Longing, paraphrased once as pleasure displeasure, is again paraphrased here as what is called bubbling, papancha sankara. When cognition attains such a state, the primordial longing, metaphorized by the bubbling, disappears. Consequently, sensation which is based on primordial longing also disappears, i.e., is totally transformed. This is the answer to the two questions posed in 873. Sutta Nipata 874 is one of the few verses in which the Atthakavagga prescribes, albeit negatively, the state we should hope for. The following four cognitive states are taught to renounce. Thus, the state to be hoped for is that of one who has no common or deranged cognition, but who has a cognition knowing that since perfect extinction of selfishness is impossible, oneself is always somehow wrong, and nevertheless, one must always try to leave self-interest behind. This never-ending process of self-denial is Nibbana, extinction. Let's reconfirm that there is no Nibbana as long as we think we have attained Nibbana, as it says, na vibhuta sanni. Why is it impossible to completely extinguish selfishness? To find out, we will elucidate what is called papancha, the origin of the all subconsciousnesses. So far, we have traced the description of the 5 phases of cognition that was used in the practice of Nibbana. The first stage of the selfish subconsciousnesses is indicated by longing, pleasure, displeasure, or the so-called papancha. But then, what is the papancha to which I give the translation of bubbling of a baby? Egerton, in his Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit dictionary, wrote, "Prapancha is a word very hard to define. A careful and searching study of the Pali is needed and has not been made. In Indian literature, we hardly find the occurrence of prapancha around or before the time of the Buddha. However, Panini's Dhatapata gives 2 meanings to the root panch, namely to make manifest, Vyakti Karana, and wide-ranging utterance, Vistarvachana. The Dhatupata used by Panini is said to have had no meaning entries, but this does not mean that the root punch was not used in the Buddha's time in such meanings as we find today in the Dhatupata. On the other hand, the 5 phases of cognition can be interpreted in 2 ways. As I said earlier, first, as cognitive process leading to action. Second, as psychological development of the baby. Itcha and Sukha-dukkha refer directly in both contexts to simple longing. In the context of baby psychology, papancha would be the unlanguaged appealing of a baby, which is a metaphor for primordial longing. There are only 2 occurrences of the word papancha in the Atthakavagga. One is in the verse we have just read, and the other in this one. 916. One should shut up the full root of the so-called babbling, the root which is I am to desire. For whatever cravings one has in the heart, practice their elimination at all times with the utmost care. Both papancha are followed by sankha, so-called, indicating its figurative meaning, primordial longing, instead of its literal meaning, babbling. We should read Manta Smriti for Manta Asmiti of the PTS edition. The earlier meter of the Atthakavagga never allows 2 long syllables in the posterior part of the 4th jhana. The seemingly case should be scanned as long-short. Thus, Mantasmi is a periphrastic future of the root man. The future tense, which refers to processes envisaged with certainty such as promise, oath, curse, or here, strong will. The noun manas, from the root man, is a vague term for consciousness in general, whether feeling, thinking, or willing, as discussed by Jan Honda in his Creator and His Spirit, Manas and Prajapati. In the famous creation hymn of the Rig Veda 10.129, Manas first appears as the creative elan, so to speak, of the newborn universe and gives birth to karma, desire, the second born. The myth was elaborated in the late Vedic literature. In the Shatapatha Brahmana, nascent Manas formed the wish to become manifest, louder, and more substantial, and thereupon create birch, language. The description reminds us of the 2 meanings given in the Dhatupata to the root punch, Vyakti Karana, to make manifest, and Vistarvachana, wide-ranging utterance. Thus, papancha, babbling, which originates from Manta Asmi, I am to wish, can be seen as it were, a newly born birch from Manas. In the next 4 stages of the 5 phases, Iccha, simple longing, progresses with the help of birch or papancha through possessiveness, sense of gain and loss, and judgment to aim. Since the Vedic myth equate the creation of the universe with the process of growth of the human mind, it naturally corresponds to the Buddha's theory of the 5 phases of cognition. Buddha's theory would have been conceived in the environment of this Brahmanic epistemology as exposed in the creation myth that prevailed at the time of the Buddha in the region. The novelty of the Buddha's theory lies in its meticulous articulation of cognition in 5 phases, conscious and subconscious. In addition, the scheme satisfies 2 interpretations as a cognitive process and as a psychological development. According to the Buddha, our primordial nature is to live as we wish, Manta Smriti, from infancy, so we must be aware of this ever-present innate longing for selfishness that dominates our mind, and thus strive to eliminate it through Nibbana. This stern view of the newborn may have something to do with Brahmanical ritual thought, which regards birth as an impurity requiring purification, just like death. Apanchasankara, so-called bubbling, is a upama, simile, to which Gargia gave a definition. Upama yad atat tat sadrisham, not that, but similar to that. Panini seems to know the four elements of simile. The Atthakavagga often uses rhetoric techniques such as composition in a complex style, construction with paired notions, multiple modifiers of the same object, or use of homophony or pun. The Atthakavagga should find its place in the early history of the Indian poetry that will culminate in the Kavya, the highly artificial literary style, in the far future. Vinayas of principal Buddhist schools preserve the memory of a session where the Buddha heard a novice, Sonakutikana, recite before him the Atthakavagga, and as well as other suttas according to later versions. This episode suggests that up to a certain period, the Atthakavagga was the special scripture to be learned and recited by the novices. Fragments of the Atthakavagga are found in the Kaloshti manuscripts around Common Era, excavated from Gandhara, and later also in a Sanskrit manuscript from Central Asia. In the 3rd century, the full text was translated into Chinese. It was quoted in the treatise of Asanga, Vasubandhu, etc., which suggests its impact even on Mahayana Buddhism. Thus, the new readings of the Atthakavagga, revealed this time by us, call for a new reading of the entire Buddhist scriptures that have the Atthakavagga as their origin. Let me give 3 examples. First, the 5 aggregates, Panchakandas, can be seen as a simplified version of the 5 phases of cognition obtained by replacing sanya with vijnana to replace piya with sanya. These changes were made probably because piya in the Atthakavagga had a specified meaning somewhat difficult to grasp. With this correspondence confirmed, the meaning of sankhara, volitional subconsciousness, will become clearer as covering the 5 subconsciousnesses of the 5 phases of cognition. The second example is the Paticca Samutpada, with a chain of 12 links. The first and second links, ignorance, avidya, and volitional formation, sankhara, correspond to the 5 subconsciousnesses of the 5 phases of cognition. These possible correspondences will allow us to examine the conception of these 2 links. The third example is the 8 consciousnesses of the Yogacara school. Krishnamanas seems to correspond to the 5 subconsciousnesses. Comparisons of this kind between the Buddha's philosophy and later Buddhist doctrines will open up possibilities for a better understanding of the Buddhist thought and of their historical development. Finally, I will try to get an overview of the teachings of the Buddha and clarify his message for the world today. In essence, the Buddha taught the 3 subjects to his disciples in the Atthakavagga. 1. Introspection. It is the practice of the Nibbana in an ascetic life. 2. Insights. These are the ability to correctly observe human beings and the world by renouncing the object of desire and delusion through introspection. 3. Purpose of the ascetic life. It is to become and live tender towards all living and non-living beings through introspection and insights. The purpose is not mentioned, but indicated as a logical consequence of the Buddha's discourses and is embodied in his actions. The Buddha never mentions tenderness or compassion because to verbalize it would damage the genuine benign mind by recognizing oneself in the midst of one's selfless act toward others. The notion of Nibbana is not compatible with a fixed articulation due to its self-referential paradox of the self always denied. Recall, na vibhuta sanni. He is not a person who has the cognition of his extinction of selfishness. Ultimately, however, showing how to cultivate tender mind towards all beings in the world and how to become able to act with this mind was the purpose of the teachings of the Buddha. Consisting of 16 suttas, the Atthakavagga prescribes the 4 practices, the 2 for introspection and the 2 for insights. The numbers in brackets are the numbers of the sutta in which the practice in question is mainly treated. Disciples practice Nibbana, extinction of selfishness, by introspecting the 5 phases of cognition in the life of a solitary ascetic. Thus practiced, introspection or Nibbana gradually cultivate a tender mind. Insights are the ability to observe human beings and the world with a tender mind. It leads to the renunciation of object of desire and delusion. Through introspection, the disciples should develop their insight, which leads to renunciation of object of desire and delusion. The object of desire include fields, houses, gold, cattle and horses, slaves, servants, women, and relatives. We should know that indulging in these objects will lead to personal ruin, and these objects will be lost in death. The object of delusion include experience, knowledge, thought, virtuous deeds, and vows. People live in society on this illusory basis and are vainly pleased or discouraged. They fight among themselves, each believing in their own basis. Both types of objects need to be re-evaluated from a selfless perspective and must be renounced. 4 items as object of delusion to be renounced are listed in the same order repeatedly with little variation in the Atthakavagga. Literally, they are what is seen, what is heard, what is thought, and virtuous deed and vow. In addition, the first 2 items are paired in several verses. They are contrasting. In an era before TVs or smartphones, what is seen was a personal experience shared only by those who were there, whereas what is heard could be shared by anyone through oral transmission. In Brahmanism, Shruti, what is heard, encompasses the mantra and Brahmana as sacred knowledge. By these 4 items are meant experience, knowledge, thought, and faith, which will correspond to the 4 spheres of human intelligence, culture, science, philosophy, and religion. If so, it follows that the Buddha emphasized that these 4 intelligences are merely object of delusions. Israeli historian Yuval Noah Harari said, Homo sapiens cannot wait. Philosophy, religion, and science are all running out of time. In fact, the 4 intelligences, adding culture to the Harari list, have so far been unable to act effectively enough against serious problems such as wars, conflict, wealth disparities, human rights violations, racial prejudice, or global environment, etc. Changing the formative principle of these intelligences will be the only way to make them work effectively in time for humanity. The 4 intelligences cannot work as long as they remain isolated systems that cannot transcend the boundaries of culture, science, philosophy, and religion. The only way to make them open systems is to let them renounce the values they espouse as absolute. And to do that, we have to start from fear. We think we are all always somewhat wrong, and strive to transcend ourselves to become more flexible, innovative, discreet, and above all, tender toward the whole world. It does not lead to anarchism, relativism, or any other fixedism, because the insight it creates are based on the cultivation of a tender mind, altruism, through the constant self-negation, introspection. This philosophy, called introspective altruism, will provide a new solid foundation for human civilization. A generalist is a person who cultivates tenderness in one's own mind through introspection, has insight into the whole world through that mind, and seeks peaceful systems for all humanity. Today, unlike the time of the Buddha, thanks to science and technology, especially information technology, it is possible to wish to become a generalist, whether one is a monk or a layperson. The increasing free time through the reduction of work time that AI will bring can be practice-oriented to become a generalist. I believe that the introspective altruism is a way to realize a society in which everyone aims to become a generalist and lives according to one's own individuality for the peace of the whole world, living and non-living. I would like to conclude my talk by adding a few words. Ryukok University, which is hosting today's colloquium, was founded 380 years ago in the spirit of Shinran Shonin, the founder of the Jodo Shinshu, the largest branch of Japanese Buddhism. Shinran Shonin's teaching, evil people are the right object of Amida's salvation, Akunin Shoki, seems to be nothing other than the Nibbana, the constant awareness of ever-present selfishness and the unceasing efforts to extinguish it. This is the prerequisite for the Buddha's philosophy. If so, Shinran Shonin's faith also seems to indicate the starting point of the practice for the cultivation of tender mind, which was the intention of the Buddha. Thank you very much for your attention.